I gave a ride to an Apache widow. By law, I must be the man she marries and has children with. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the dusty desert road.
Great. The wind whispered through the sparse trees and shrubs, carrying with it the faint scent of sage and dry earth. John had been driving for hours, his old pickup bouncing over the rough, uneven terrain. He had left the highway hours ago, taking a quieter route through the desert to reach a small town he had never visited before. The journey was meant to be peaceful, a break from his busy life, but the endless emptiness of the landscape had left him feeling both calm and restless. As he rounded a bend in the road, he noticed a figure standing by the side of the dirt path. At first he thought it might be another traveler, but as he came closer he saw a woman struggling to push a small, rusted car that had clearly broken down. She was alone, dressed in simple, traditional clothes that spoke of her deep connection to her heritage. Her hair, dark and thick, was pulled back neatly, but dust and sweat had streaked her face. Her eyes reflected worry and exhaustion, and her hands were raw from the effort of moving the vehicle. John slowed down and pulled his truck to a stop a few feet away from her. He rolled down the window and called out gently, "Hey, do you need some help?" The woman paused, her body leaning against the car, and looked at him with a mixture of relief and hesitation. "Yes?" "My car won't start," she said softly. Her voice had a melodic quality, with the cadence that hinted at her cultural roots. Breaths. She spoke slowly, carefully, as if measuring each word. John got out of the truck and walked over. "I can give you a ride," he offered, "or help you push the car, whatever works best." She hesitated for a moment, glancing at the long, empty stretch of road behind them. "A ride? That would be very kind," she said, finally. There was gratitude in her eyes, but also a trace of caution, as if she were unsure whether she could trust a stranger. John nodded, smiling reassuringly, and helped her load her few belongings into the back of his pickup. As they drove along the winding dirt road, the desert stretched endlessly around them. Red rocks jutted out of the ground like ancient sentinels, and the occasional cactus stood tall, silhouetted against the orange and gold of the evening sky. For Hest, the silence between them was comfortable at first, broken only by the soft hum of the truck's engine. After a few minutes, John tried to make conversation. "You live around here?" he asked. "Bay, near the village ahead,"
she replied. Her voice was quiet, but there was a strength in it that caught John's attention.
"It is not far. Thank you for helping me." John nodded.
"Of course. I know how frustrating car trouble can be."
"It's no problem at all." As they drove, he noticed small details about her, how she kept glancing at the horizon, as if watching for something or someone.
Her hands rested gently on her lap, and she seemed lost in thought. John respected her silence, sensing that she might prefer to be alone with her thoughts. But every so often she would offer a small smile, a fleeting gesture that made him feel welcome despite the quiet. The road grew narrower and rougher, winding through rocky hills and sandy patches. The truck jolted over stones and bumps, but the woman did not complain. She looked out at the landscape, her expression thoughtful, almost distant. John wondered what her life was like here, in such a remote place, and what stories she might carry with her. After a while, curiosity got the better of him. "If you don't mind me asking, why were you out here all alone? Did your car just break down?"
She hesitated again, then nodded. "Yes."
It stopped working.
"I was on my way to the village when it happened. I had no one to call for help." Her voice held a quiet sadness, a sense of burden carried alone. John felt a pang of empathy. He could imagine the isolation of living in such a remote area, where help was not always nearby. "You must be very brave," he said sincerely. "It's not easy to handle something like that by yourself." She smiled faintly, a touch of gratitude in her eyes.
Bravery or necessity, she replied. Sometimes we do what we must, even when it is difficult. The sun dipped lower, turning the sky a deep shade of pink and purple. Shadows stretched long across the desert, and the air began to cool. John realized that nightfall would come quickly here, and he felt a sense of urgency to get her safely to the village before darkness fell. He glanced at her, noticing the subtle tension in her posture. She seemed small against the vastness of the landscape, but there was a quiet dignity in the way she carried herself. After some time, the road began to flatten, and in the distance John could make out the outlines of a small village nestled among low hills. Smoke rose from a few chimneys, and he could see lights flickering in some of the houses. The woman's eyes lit up when she saw it. "We are almost there," she said softly, a hint of relief in her voice. He noticed the simple, modest homes and the small gardens that surrounded some of them. Children played near a well, laughing and chasing one another, while elders sat on porches watching the evening sky. The village had a peaceful, timeless quality, as if it existed in its own world, untouched by the rush of modern life. As they entered the main path of the village, a few people stopped and watched the truck pass by. Some nodded politely, while others exchanged quiet greetings.
John noticed that the woman seemed to recognize them, giving small nods and murmured words in her language.
But he realized that she was part of a close-knit community, one where everyone knew each other and traditions were important. Finally, they reached a small house on the edge of the village. The woman gathered her belongings and turned to John.
"Thank you," she said again, her voice filled with genuine appreciation.
"You have helped me greatly."
John smiled. It was no trouble at all.
"I'm glad I could help." As he watched her walk toward her home, he felt a strange mix of satisfaction and curiosity. There was something about this encounter that felt significant, though he could not yet put his finger on it. Little did he know, the simple act of giving her a ride would change his life in ways he could never have imagined. He started the truck and drove away, glancing in the rearview mirror. The desert stretched out behind him, vast and quiet, yet alive with possibilities. That evening, under the fading light of the sun, he realized that kindness, even in its simplest form, could open doors to unexpected journeys, connections, and lessons about life he had never anticipated. The desert wind rustled softly through the trees, carrying with it the sense that this encounter was only the beginning. The man had given a ride to a widow in need, and in doing so he had unknowingly stepped into a world of traditions, responsibilities, and relationships that would challenge everything he thought he knew about life, duty, and love. As night fell and the stars began to appear, sparkling against the dark velvet sky, John continued driving, unaware of the path that lay ahead. A path that would test his heart, his understanding, and his very identity, all sparked by a single simple act of kindness on a quiet desert road. John stayed outside his truck for a moment, watching the woman disappear into her small home. The village around him was quiet now, the last rays of sunlight fading behind the hills, leaving a soft purple glow in the sky. For a moment he thought about driving on, back to his original route, back to his old life where kindness didn't have consequences beyond a thank you. But something made him pause. There was a weight to this place, a sense that everything he had just witnessed carried more meaning than he understood. Before he could move, an older man appeared from the shadows near the house. His hair was silver, his face deeply lined from years under the sun. He walked slowly but steadily, his eyes fixed on John. The man's presence was calm but commanding, like someone who had seen much and understood more. "You helped her," the elder said, his voice steady and deep. "Yes, sir," John replied, unsure why the man was addressing him. Her car broke down.
I gave her a ride. The elder studied him for a moment, then nodded.
You did more than give her a ride. In our tradition, that is not just kindness. It is a responsibility. You must understand what that means. Grasp. John blinked, confused. Responsibility? I don't understand.
The elder gestured for him to follow.
Breath. They walked slowly through the village, past small homes, gardens, and a few villagers who paused briefly to observe the interaction. The air was cool now, carrying the scent of wood fires and the soft aroma of herbs.
You have acted in a way that honors our people, the elder explained. But every action has meaning.
When a man aids a widow, she and her family see it as more than help. It is a bond. By law, by tradition, you are expected to become her husband and to help continue her family. This is our way, passed down for generations. John's mind spun. Wait, I'm supposed to marry her. He could feel his heart pounding. He had only meant to do a good deed, to help someone in need. Bah.
Marriage had never crossed his mind.
He had no intention of this.
I'm not sure I can do that. I didn't even know her.
The elder placed a hand on his shoulder, firm but gentle. I know this may seem sudden to you, but in our culture, actions matter more than words. The law is not meant to punish you. It is meant to protect her, her family, and the balance of our community. You have been chosen by your own act. Now you must decide if you will honor it.
John struggled to breathe normally. He had never imagined that a simple act of kindness could carry such weight.
In his world, helping someone meant offering a hand, a ride, or a kind word. It never meant being bound to a lifetime commitment. But here in this village, in this culture, he realized that rules were different. Traditions shaped lives in ways he had not experienced. Why? Why me? He asked, trying to make sense of it. Because you acted without hesitation, the elder said. You did not ask for reward or question her worth. You helped her because it was needed. That is rare. That is why the responsibility falls to you.
John looked toward the house where the widow had gone. He remembered her tired eyes, the quiet strength she had carried, and the faint smile she had offered him.
He could feel an unfamiliar pull in his chest, a mixture of curiosity, fear, and a strange sense of obligation. Could he leave her now?
Could he ignore a tradition older than anything he had known? The elder continued walking, his pace steady.
You must spend time in the village, learn our ways. He glances around in despair. Learn who she is. Only then can you make a choice that is honest and true. This is not a punishment. This is an opportunity to understand life beyond yourself. John nodded slowly, unsure if he was ready for the journey the elder was describing. But something deep inside told him that walking away immediately would not feel right. We had stepped into this situation, and somehow he felt he had to see it through, at least to understand it fully. Over the next few days, John remained in the village. He stayed in a small guest room offered by the elder, a simple space with a bed, a wooden table, and a small lamp. The village moved at a slow, deliberate pace. Every day he saw the widow perform her daily tasks, fetching water, tending to a small garden, and caring for the children she had inherited from her late husband. Each action was performed with a quiet grace, a dignity that made John feel both admiration and a growing sense of connection.
He began speaking with other villagers, learning about their lives, their traditions, and their expectations.
They welcomed him with cautious warmth, observing him carefully, yet giving him the space to prove his intentions. He learned that in the Apache culture, every action carried meaning, and community bonds were strengthened through mutual respect and shared responsibility. A man's role was not only to provide for a family, but also to protect and honor the traditions that had kept the people united for generations. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, John found himself walking with the widow along a narrow path near a small stream. The water reflected the fiery colors of the sunset, and the air smelled of earth and growing things. She spoke softly about her late husband, about the hardships she had faced, and about her hope that her children could grow up strong and safe. John listened, feeling a mixture of sorrow and empathy.
I never expected anyone to help me, she said quietly.
Buzz. Most people would have driven past.
But you stopped! That matters.
John swallowed hard. I didn't know. I didn't know what it would mean. I just wanted to help, bae. She looked at him with a thoughtful expression.
Actions have meaning.
Sometimes more than we realize.
That is why our people have these ways. It is not meant to trap or scare.
Right. It is meant to honor and protect.
He realized that his presence here was no longer about a simple ride. It was about understanding, about stepping into a world far different from his own. It was about respect, responsibility, and choices that had consequences beyond his immediate life. The more time he spent in the village, the more he began to understand the depth of the tradition. The law was not a punishment. It was a covenant. It ensured that widows were cared for, that families remained connected, and that the balance of life continued through generations. It was not about forcing a man into marriage. It was about honor, trust, and the continuity of a culture that had survived centuries of change and challenge. John also saw the strength of the widow. She was not weak nor helpless. She carried her burdens with dignity, raising her children with patience and care, maintaining the home and honoring her community. That there was a vulnerability in her eyes that told him she had been alone for too long. He began to feel a growing sense of protectiveness, of wanting to support her, not out of obligation, but because he genuinely cared about her well-being. Each day brought new lessons. He helped with chores, learned how to navigate the desert terrain, and participated in small village activities. He began to notice how connected everyone was, how every action, every word, and every choice affected not just the individual but the entire community. It was a way of life so different from his own, yet it resonated deeply within him. At night, sitting under the vast starlit sky, John reflected on everything he had experienced. He realized that he could not leave this place unchanged. The ride he had given, the kindness he had offered, had pulled him into a world of meaning, culture, and responsibility. He understood that whatever decision he made, it would shape not just his life, but the life of the widow and her children. He thought about the elder's words. Only then can you make a choice that is honest and true. John knew that he had to choose carefully, not out of fear or obligation, but with understanding, respect, and an open heart.
The days ahead would demand patience, courage, and a willingness to see life from a perspective he had never considered. Breath. As he lay down that night, the sounds of the village around him, the soft murmur of voices, the distant laughter of children, and the rustling of leaves in the wind, made him feel a part of something larger than himself. Breath. He felt the weight of responsibility, yes, but also the quiet hope that perhaps kindness could lead to connection, understanding, and a life he had never imagined. John did not know what the future would hold, but for the first time he realized that some encounters were not merely chance, they were invitations. Invitations to grow, to learn, and to step into a world where actions carried profound meaning. and as the stars glittered above the desert hills, he knew that his journey had only just begun. Days turned into a week, and John found himself waking up each morning to the soft sounds of village life. Chickens clucked near small pens. The wind rustled through desert shrubs, and distant voices echoed from neighbors tending their gardens or carrying out daily chores. Every morning he would sit on the small porch of the guest room, sipping weak coffee from a chipped mug, thinking about the woman he had helped, the widow whose life had become intertwined with his through a simple act of kindness.
At first, John felt uncertain and even fearful about the situation.
Around in his lungs. The weight of the village's expectation pressed on him, a silent reminder that leaving now might be dishonorable. But as he watched the widow moving through her day, he began to understand that this was not a trap. She had lived through loss and hardship, carrying responsibilities that would have overwhelmed most people. There was a quiet strength in her that both humbled and inspired him. He often watched from a distance as she worked with her children. Two young boys, lively and curious, followed her wherever she went, asking questions, laughing, and sometimes testing her patience. John noticed how tenderly she guided them, correcting mistakes without raising her voice, and showing them the balance between discipline and love. The scene made him realize the depth of her character. This was not a woman waiting to be rescued. She had survived, thrived, and protected her family all on her own. Yet she had allowed him into her life, letting a stranger from outside her world offer help when she needed it most.
One afternoon, John joined her in the small garden behind her house. The widow showed him how to tend the plants, how to water them carefully, and how to keep the soil rich and fertile.
He struggled at first, digging holes too deep or watering too much, but she corrected him patiently, guiding his hands when necessary. During these quiet moments, she began to speak more freely, telling him stories about her late husband, about how the children had grown, and about the challenges of keeping their families safe in a world that did not always understand their traditions. "I used to fear the future," she admitted one day, wiping sweat from her brow. "After he passed, I thought I would have to face everything alone."
I did not know if anyone would understand the rules of our people, the way we live, the way we protect our family. And now, you have come.
You acted without knowing, and yet you have taken on responsibility.
John paused, feeling the weight of her words.
I didn't know, he said softly. I just wanted to help. I never imagined this would mean so much. I didn't know what it would involve. She smiled faintly. Sometimes actions carry more meaning than we intend. That is why our traditions exist, to guide those meanings and protect our people.
You cannot take it lightly, but you can choose to honor it if you wish.
The words lingered in John's mind long after the sun had set.
At night, he would sit alone under the vast star-filled sky, thinking about the responsibility that had suddenly been placed upon him.
He had never considered marriage or family in this way, and now he faced the possibility of committing his life to someone he had just met. The thought was daunting, and yet something stirred within him, a sense of duty, respect, and curiosity about the life he might share with her. John also began to observe the village more closely, but every action here carried weight. Every word was meaningful. The children learned not only from their parents, but from the entire community. Elders guided them with patience, teaching them the traditions, stories, and ways that had preserved their people for generations.
John started to see that the widow's strength came not only from her own resilience, but also from her deep connection to this community.
She was part of a lineage that valued honor, family, and survival, and she carried it forward even in the face of personal loss. During these days, John found himself questioning his own values and life. In the world he had come from, people often acted without thinking about consequences, without understanding how their actions affected others. Here, every deed mattered. A single act of kindness had bound him to responsibility and expectation. It was a lesson he could not ignore and one he began to appreciate. Despite the weight of expectation, moments of lightness and laughter began to appear. The children would run up to him, curious about the stranger who had become part of their world. They asked him to lift them, play small games, and help with chores. At first he felt awkward, unused to the responsibilities of caring for children, but gradually he found joy in their laughter, their energy, and their trust in him. The widow, too, began to speak more openly with him, sharing small parts of her life that had been hard to bear alone. She told him about her late husband's kindness, her struggles with poverty, and the moments of quiet happiness she had once known. John listened with growing empathy, realizing that the bond between them was slowly forming, not forced, not demanded, but built through shared experiences, understanding, and respect. One evening, after helping the children bathe and prepare for bed, John sat beside the widow near a small fire outside the house. The desert night was alive with the sounds of crickets, distant coyotes, and the soft whisper of wind through the trees. Breaths. She looked at him quietly, her eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. "You have spent time with us," she said softly. "You have seen our lives, our struggles, our joys, and still you remain. That shows something. It shows that you understand what it means to care, not just to act." John took a deep breath. "But I am trying. It is not easy. I never expected to face this, to be asked to step into a life that is so different from my own. But I see now that it is not just about me, Ray. It is about you, the children, and your people. And I want to understand it and do what is right." She nodded slowly, a small smile forming on her lips. That is all anyone can ask for. Breath. To try, to listen, to respect. But it can be good if we are honest with ourselves and others. As the nights passed, John's inner struggle continued. He wrestled with fear, uncertainty, and the enormity of the commitment that lay before him. Yet he also felt a growing sense of purpose. He realized that this situation was asking more of him than he had ever been asked before. Not just courage, but empathy, understanding, and a willingness to grow beyond his own limitations.
He began to notice changes in himself.
He became more patient, more observant, more aware of the ways his actions affected those around him. He learned to listen deeply, to consider others' feelings, and to act with intention rather than impulse. The village, the widow, and the children were teaching him lessons that no classroom or city life could have offered. One day, while helping the widow repair a small fence around the garden, John paused to look at her. The sunlight caught her hair, making it shine like dark silk, and he saw the strength and resilience that had kept her family together. In that moment, he understood why the elder had said his act carried meaning beyond what he could imagine. He had not simply given her a ride. He had stepped into a life, a tradition, and a bond that was far greater than himself. By the end of the week, John felt a quiet shift within himself. The fear and uncertainty were still there, but they were accompanied by a growing sense of connection, respect, and responsibility. He understood that the choice before him was not just about marriage or obligation. It was about honor, empathy, and the willingness to step into a life that mattered to others. As he lay down that night under the vast expanse of stars, he realized that he was no longer the same man who had driven along the lonely desert road days ago. He had been tested, challenged, and transformed by kindness, tradition, and the simple act of helping someone in need. And though he did not yet know the path ahead, he felt ready to face it, to understand it, and to choose with his heart as well as his mind. The desert night was calm, and the village slept under a blanket of quiet, with only the distant howl of a coyote to mark the passing of time. John felt a sense of peace settle over him, a feeling that he was beginning to belong. Not fully, not yet, but enough to know that leaving would not feel right. He had entered this world as a stranger, and now he was part of its rhythm, its challenges, and its quiet, enduring beauty. And as the first hint of dawn painted the sky in soft pinks and oranges, John knew that the days ahead would demand courage, understanding, and love, but they also held the promise of connection, growth, and the possibility of a life richer than he had ever imagined. Days in the village blended together with a rhythm that was new to John, yet strangely comforting. Each morning brought chores, conversations, and small lessons about life, family, and tradition. Yet, among the responsibilities and routines, something unexpected began to take shape between John and the widow, a quiet connection that neither of them could deny. At first, it was small gestures. He would hand her a basket of freshly picked vegetables, and she would smile with genuine gratitude. She taught him how to carry water from the stream without spilling, how to cook simple meals over an open fire, and how to care for her children when she needed rest. In return, he offered his strength, lifting heavy bundles, repairing fences, and helping with tasks that required more physical effort. One afternoon, they worked together in the garden. The sun was high, and the heat pressed down on them, but the rhythm of their work brought a sense of calm. John noticed how the widow moved gracefully among the rows of plants, her hands gentle but firm, her eyes focused on each task. He admired her dedication, not only to her home and children, but to the life she had created for herself despite the loss she had suffered. "You are patient," John said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence. "I've never seen anyone work like this before, with such care for every little thing." She glanced at him, a small smile forming. "Patience comes from necessity," she replied. "Life teaches us that rushing only brings mistakes. We learn to care, to pay attention, and to endure." John thought about his own life, the fast pace of his city, the constant rush, the way he had often overlooked small but important details. Here with her, he began to see the value of slowing down, of being present, and of giving attention to the moments that truly mattered. As the days passed, their conversations grew deeper. They shared stories about their pasts, fears, and hopes for the future. The widow told him about her late husband, a kind man who had cared deeply for his family and community. She spoke of the early years of her marriage, the joy of raising children, and the sorrow of losing him. John listened, feeling a mixture of empathy and awe for the life she had endured. "I never thought I could manage everything alone," she said one evening, sitting near the fire as the children slept. "But I had to. There was no other choice. Sometimes I wish someone could understand what it is like, not just help, but truly understand." John looked at her, realizing that he had begun to understand, not fully, but enough to feel the weight of her experiences. "I want to understand," he said softly. "Not because I have to, but because I care. I can't imagine how hard it must have been, but I can be here, with you, if you'll let me." Breath. Her eyes met his, and for the first time he saw a flicker of something more than gratitude, trust, perhaps even the beginnings of hope. She nodded slowly, as if acknowledging that he was no longer just a stranger, but someone who could be a part of her life. The children noticed the changes too. They began to include him in their games, asking for his help with small adventures around the village. John discovered that he enjoyed their laughter, their energy, and their curiosity. He found himself learning as much from them as they learned from him, understanding that care and connection could be expressed in many forms, not only through words, but through actions, presence, and shared experiences. One morning, as they walked to the stream to fetch water, John noticed a quiet pause in the widow's steps. She looked at him with a seriousness that made his heart tighten. You must know, she said, that what we are building, it is not simple. Our people's laws are not just words. They bind us, guide us, and protect us. You must be ready to take that responsibility seriously if you choose to stay. Die. John nodded. I know, he said.
I understand more every day, and I want to try to understand, to honor, and to be here for you and the children.
She smiled softly, and the tension in her shoulders eased. Then we will see, she said. Inspiration. Step by step. Life is made of small steps, not giant leaps.
Trust must grow like the plants in the garden, carefully, with patience and attention.
Over the following days, John and the widow began to spend more time together outside of chores.
They would sit by the stream, watching the water flow over stones and talk about life, dreams, and hopes. She taught him how to identify herbs, how to read the weather from the clouds, and how to listen to the stories carried by the wind. But John shared bits of his life, the world he had come from, and the lessons he had learned from people who were far different from those in the village. In these quiet moments, John began to see her not just as a widow in need of help, but as a person with depth, wisdom, and a life rich in experiences. He saw her laughter, her gentle patience with the children, and the small ways she expressed care for the villagers. And slowly, he felt something change within himself, a bond that was no longer about obligation, but about genuine connection.
One evening, as they prepared a meal together, John accidentally spilled water over the fire.
He cursed softly under his breath, expecting the widow to scold him. Instead, she laughed. A soft, melodic sound that made him look at her in surprise.
Do not worry, she said. Mistakes happen.
What matters is that we continue, that we learn, and that we keep moving forward. John laughed too, feeling a warmth in his chest he had not expected. I think I could learn a lot from you, he said. You already have, she replied simply, her eyes meeting his. Not just about survival, but about patience, care, and responsibility. You have begun to understand what it means to be part of something greater than yourself.
As the days turned into weeks, John's connection with the widow and her children grew stronger.
He no longer felt like a stranger in the village. He was part of its rhythm, its challenges, and its small victories. He began to take pride in the little things, fixing a broken fence, helping the children with schoolwork, cooking a meal that everyone enjoyed. Each task strengthened the bond between him and the family he had come to care for. But alongside the growing closeness, John could not ignore the lingering tension of expectation. He knew that at any moment, the reality of the cultural law could weigh heavily on both him and the widow. Their bond had formed naturally, but it existed within a framework of responsibility that neither could escape. This awareness made every shared moment more meaningful, every conversation more significant, and every choice more carefully considered. One day, while walking through the hills surrounding the village, John paused to look at the widow. She was watching the children play in the distance, her face serene yet thoughtful. He realized in that moment that he admired her not only for her strength, but for her wisdom, her resilience, and her ability to live fully despite loss. You have taught me much,
He said softly.
about life, about people, about responsibility. I never expected to learn so much from one ride, from one meeting. But I have. And I feel that I am ready to understand more, to take on more, if you will allow it.
She turned to him, her eyes calm but searching.
Then we will continue, step by step, she said. Not rushing, not forcing, just being present, learning, and growing together. That is the way we live.
John nodded, feeling a deep sense of peace.
He understood that the journey ahead was not about obligation alone. It was about mutual respect, shared effort, and the gradual building of trust. Each day offered a chance to connect more deeply, to understand more fully, and to become part of a life that was both challenging and beautiful. As the sun set behind the distant hills, casting long shadows across the village, John realized that he had begun to feel at home. The fear and uncertainty that had weighed on him were still there, but they were accompanied by a quiet joy, a sense of purpose, and a growing love for the woman and children who had unexpectedly become his world. That night, sitting by the fire as the children slept, John felt a sense of clarity. The bond he shared with the widow was not only shaped by tradition, but by shared experiences, trust, and understanding. He knew that whatever the future held, the connection they were building was real, meaningful, and worth nurturing. The desert around the village was calm, the stars twinkling like scattered diamonds in the dark sky. The wind whispered softly through the trees, carrying with it the promise of new days, new lessons, and the continued growth of a bond that had begun with a simple act of kindness. John closed his eyes, feeling a sense of hope and determination he had never known before. He was no longer a stranger. He was part of a story far greater than himself, a story of life, responsibility, and the quiet power of connection. The days grew warmer as spring approached, and the village settled into its slow, steady rhythm. John had long since stopped feeling like an outsider. Each sunrise brought with it small tasks, shared conversations, and the comforting routine of caring for the widow and her children. The bond he had built with them over weeks had grown stronger, deeper, and more meaningful. He now understood what the elder had tried to teach him, that actions, kindness, and responsibility were more than mere gestures. They carried consequences, meaning, and the potential to shape lives. One morning, John rose early, walking quietly to the stream before the sun had fully risen. The water reflected the pale gold of dawn, and the desert air was crisp and clean. He thought about everything that had happened, the ride he had given, the conversation with the elder, the first awkward days in the village, and the slowly growing connection with the widow. He realized that his life had changed completely in ways he had never imagined. What had started as a simple act of kindness had turned into a path that demanded courage, reflection, and a willingness to embrace something far larger than himself. When he returned to the house, he found the widow already awake, preparing breakfast for the children. She looked up and smiled softly, a gesture that made his chest tighten in a strange, unfamiliar way. They had learned to communicate with glances, small words, and shared moments. There was a quiet understanding between them now, a sense of partnership that had been built over time through patience, effort, and shared responsibility. "Good morning, John," said gently. "Good morning," she replied. "The children are already awake?" John nodded, glancing toward the small rooms where the boys were beginning their day. "Yes, they are excited about today. Bray. Something in the air, I think." She laughed softly, a sound that was warm and comforting. "Perhaps. The desert has its own ways of reminding us of life's surprises, Brass." As the morning progressed, the elder approached John again. His presence carried the same quiet authority as before, but there was a softness in his eyes now. "You have spent time with her," he said. "You have learned, observed, and shared life. The bond between you is no longer unknown. The time has come to decide whether you will accept the responsibility that your act has brought upon you."
John felt a mixture of fear and certainty. He had wrestled with the idea of commitment, of responsibility, and of stepping into a role he had never anticipated.
But now, after weeks of living alongside the widow and her children, after witnessing her strength, her courage, and her kindness, he knew the answer. "I will accept it," he said firmly. "But Not out of obligation, but because I care. Because I want to be here with them, to support them, and to honor your tradition." The elder nodded, a small smile breaking the lines of his weathered face. "Then you have chosen wisely. This is not just a law. It is a covenant. You will join not only her life, but the life of the children and the community. And in doing so, you honor us all."
In the days that followed, preparations for a small ceremony began.
It was not grand in the sense of city celebrations, but it was rich in meaning. The villagers came together, offering handmade gifts, blessings, and guidance. The widow's children helped in small ways, placing flowers, arranging food, and watching curiously as their lives prepared for a change they were beginning to understand.
John worked alongside them, carrying supplies, arranging the fire, and learning each detail of the ceremony.
He was careful to follow every instruction, every custom, knowing that these traditions were the foundation of the community and the bond he was about to solidify. The responsibility he had once feared now carried a sense of honor. It was not a burden. It was a promise, one he was ready to keep.
On the day of the ceremony, the village gathered under the open sky.
The sun was bright but gentle, the desert wind carrying the faint scent of sage and desert flowers. The children stood close to their mother, holding small tokens of blessing. The widow wore a simple dress, carefully adorned with colors that represented life, respect, and strength. Her eyes met John's, and for the first time, there was no hesitation between them, only understanding, respect, and a quiet joy. The elder spoke first, his voice steady and clear. He spoke of tradition, of responsibility, and of the bonds that held the community together. He reminded them all that this union was not merely a joining of two people, but a connection that extended to family, community, and the continuity of life. John listened carefully, feeling the weight and beauty of the words. He understood now that tradition was not meant to control, but to guide, to honor, and to protect. When it was his turn, John stepped forward. He looked at the widow and her children, and he felt a surge of emotion.
"I promise to be here," he said.
"To care, to protect, and to honor our lives together. I will do my best to support you, the children and this community. I do this freely, with respect and love." The widow stepped forward as well, her voice steady and calm.
"I welcome your presence, your care, and your respect."
Together, we will face life's challenges, raise these children with love, and honor the traditions that guide us. I accept you, not because of law alone, but because of the understanding and care that you have shown. The children, sensing the importance of the moment, approached them and offered small blessings, touching their hands, holding on to them, and smiling with the innocent joy of a new chapter in their lives. John felt a deep warmth in his chest as he realized that this was no longer just a ceremony. It was the beginning of a family, formed not out of obligation alone, but out of respect, care, and connection. The villagers joined in, offering songs, small dances, and words of encouragement. There was laughter, warmth, and a sense of unity that John had never experienced before. He realized that he had been given more than a responsibility. He had been given a place, a purpose, and a connection that went beyond himself, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. John and the widow stood together, watching the children play nearby. He felt a sense of peace he had never known, a quiet happiness that came not from wealth, recognition, or ease, but from connection, responsibility, and love. That night, as they sat around a small fire with the children, John thought about the journey that had brought him here. A simple act of kindness, giving a ride to a stranger, had transformed his life in ways he could never have imagined. He had faced fear, uncertainty, and the weight of tradition, and he had emerged not just changed, but enriched. He looked at the widow, her face illuminated by the firelight. And he felt gratitude. Gratitude for her strength, her patience, and her willingness to open her life to him. Gratitude for the lessons he had learned about empathy, responsibility, and connection. And gratitude for the opportunity to be part of something meaningful, something enduring, and something larger than himself. In the quiet of the night, with the children sleeping and the village peaceful, John realized that life was not measured only by the choices we make for ourselves, but by the ways we touch the lives of others. By giving her a ride, he had set in motion a series of events that had brought him not just love, but understanding, purpose, and belonging. He knew that the road ahead would not always be easy.
There would be challenges, responsibilities, and moments of doubt, but he also knew that he was no longer alone, and neither was the widow.
Together they would face life's trials, celebrate its joys, and build a family rooted in respect, love, and tradition.
As the stars glittered above the desert, John felt a sense of completion, not an ending, but the fulfillment of a journey that had begun with a single, simple act of kindness. He understood now that life's unexpected turns could bring the greatest gifts, and that true courage and love were found not in grand gestures, but in patience, empathy, and commitment.
And so, under the vast sky of the desert, with the fire flickering softly and the children resting peacefully, John embraced his new life, a life of responsibility, connection, and love. A life that had begun with a ride and now continued with purpose, understanding, and the quiet joy of belonging. The desert night was calm, the air still and gentle. For the first time, John felt fully at home, not just in the village, but in a life that had been built through trust, care, and shared experience. He had given kindness, and in return, life had given him something far greater. A family, a community, and a future he was proud to be part of.